Part 1. The beginning of betrayal. I never imagined that I would find myself standing on the edge of a life I had worked so hard to build. My marriage, my family, the quiet rhythm of my everyday existence. They were all supposed to be unshakable, timeless pillars of happiness. Yet here I was, questioning everything, standing at the precipice of a life that suddenly felt more fragile than I could have ever anticipated. It all started so subtly, so quietly, that I didn't even realize it until I found myself already deep in the fog of uncertainty. The truth is, it began with something small, something that I convinced myself didn't matter at all. A fleeting feeling of restlessness that crept into my heart like a quiet storm. At first, who wouldn't? After all, I had a husband, Daniel, who was good, dependable. We had built a life together, and from the outside, it seemed perfect. There were no obvious cracks in our marriage, no overt signs of trouble. But beneath the surface, I began to notice a shift. It wasn't love that was lacking, at least not in the way that one might think. We were still in love, I believed that. But it was the kind of love that had grown comfortable, predictable, maybe even a little stale. The passion that once ignited our connection had dimmed. We had become like roommates, sharing a life, raising kids, but not really living together anymore. There were no fiery arguments, no dramatic confessions, just silence that stretched between us in ways that neither of us dared to acknowledge. It was during one of those family gatherings, one of those sunny summer afternoons that seemed to stretch forever, that I first noticed him, Ethan, my husband's cousin, a man I had known my entire life, but had never truly seen until that day. It was almost as if I was looking at him for the first time. He wasn't the life of the party, not the loudest or most outgoing person in the room. In fact, Ethan was the type who preferred the quiet corners of family gatherings. Keeping to himself, he was reserved, thoughtful, and introspective. But on that summer evening, something changed in the way I looked at him. Maybe it was the shift in my own life, the growing restlessness inside me that made me notice him differently. Maybe it was the way the soft, golden light of the setting sun made his features look so much more alive. Our conversation started innocently enough, like all conversations at family gatherings. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the usual things, old memories, family traditions. But as the evening wore on, and the world around us quieted, our words began to take on a different tone. There was a new depth to the way we spoke to each other, a level of connection that neither of us had expected. And that's when I felt it. The spark. It was subtle at first, a slight tremor in the air between us that only I seemed to notice. But as our conversation continued, it grew stronger. Ethan spoke about his dreams, his frustrations, the loneliness he sometimes felt, and how difficult it was to find meaning in a world that often felt hollow. I was captivated. Not just by the words he spoke, but by the way he made me feel. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. He wasn't just listening to me, he was understanding me. I didn't want to admit it, even to myself, but I was drawn to him. His presence, his quiet intensity, stirred something inside of me. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was a feeling that I hadn't experienced in a long time. And it terrified me. It terrified me, because I knew that this moment could mean the beginning of something I could never undo. I tried to push it aside, bury it deep within me, convincing myself that it was nothing more than a passing moment. But the truth was that Ethan lingered in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I told myself it was harmless, just a fleeting connection between two people. But I couldn't deny that every time I saw him at subsequent family events, my heart would race. Every glance, every smile, every word seemed to carry an unspoken weight. It felt like something was building between us, and I couldn't control it. Part 2. The growing attraction. As weeks passed, I tried to focus on the life I had built with Daniel. I told myself that I had everything I needed: a loving husband, children, a home, a future. But every time Ethan was near, the feeling inside me intensified. He wasn't just someone I found attractive. He was someone who made me feel alive again. And it wasn't just physical attraction. It was the way he saw me, not just as a wife, a mother, or a person who had grown too comfortable in her life. He saw me, the person I had been before responsibilities and routine, had worn me down. The truth was, my marriage had become stagnant. Daniel was a great man, but the spark between us had faded. I didn't know how to bring it back. We had stopped talking about our dreams and our desires. Our conversations had become limited to the day-to-day chores of family life. The long talks about our future had turned into brief exchanges about bills and school events. And then there was Ethan. Every time I spoke to him, I felt like I was peeling back layers of myself that I hadn't known I was hiding. He listened in a way that Daniel hadn't. He understood me in a way that Daniel couldn't. It wasn't that Daniel didn't love me. He did. But we had lost something along the way of who I wanted to be. I would catch myself looking for excuses to see him, to speak with him. I'd find myself seeking him out in a crowd, even if it was just for a brief conversation. Our interactions remained innocent at first. Smiles across the room, light banter in the kitchen, as if the path I was walking on was slowly veering off course, and I couldn't stop it. It wasn't until one autumn evening that everything changed. We had gathered for another family dinner, and I stepped outside to clear my head. As I walked onto the porch, I saw him, Ethan, standing there alone, his breath visible in the cool air. We began talking as we always did, but this time something was different. There was a weight to our words, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I'm just going through the motions, but I'm not really living. Ethan didn't respond right away. He stood there, looking out at the horizon, as if thinking about what I had said. I know what you mean, he said finally, his voice quiet. Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, just existing, but not really being alive. His words struck a chord deep within me. I had never heard anyone speak so openly about the emptiness I had been feeling for so long. In that moment, everything changed. The connection between us didn't, and I knew that we were on the edge of something that could change everything. But it scared me. It terrified me. Part 3. The Point of No Return. The autumn evening stayed with me long after I had returned to my family, long after the last of the guests had left the house. As I lay in bed next to Daniel, the warmth of his body beside mine only emphasized the cold distance that had grown between us over the years. The words Ethan had spoken echoed in my mind, just existing, but not really being alive. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I hadn't been alive in a long time. Not truly. Every time I thought of Ethan, I was filled with a deep sense of longing, not just for him, but for the part of myself that I had lost. The passionate, vibrant woman I used to be. The one who dreamed, who felt deeply, and who wasn't afraid to live life fully. And in that longing, I felt more guilt than I could bear. Because here I was, a married woman, a mother, betraying the man who had been my rock for years. The man who had stood by my side through everything. Daniel had been nothing but good to me. Yet I found myself consumed by thoughts of another man. It wasn't that Daniel was bad or that he wasn't enough. He was everything I could have ever wanted in a partner. But the monotony of our life together had stolen something vital. There was no spark, no fire, just routine. And every time I looked into Ethan's eyes, I saw something different. An unspoken understanding, an intensity that I had been craving for so long, like I could be more than just a wife and mother. The internal battle raged on within me. I told myself I would stop thinking about him. I told myself I would put these feelings to rest. But every time I saw him at family events, every time our conversations lingered a little too long, I couldn't help but feel drawn to him again. The way he listened, the way his eyes held mine just a little too long. It was as if he was waiting for something to happen between us, too. And as much as I tried to ignore it, as much as I tried to convince myself that it was harmless, the attraction only grew stronger. One evening, while the children were out with their friends, and Daniel was away on a business trip, I found myself once again alone with Ethan at a family gathering. This time, we didn't speak to each other across the room. We found ourselves together in a quiet corner of the house, as if the universe had conspired to bring us together. The tension between us was palpable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew that there was no going back. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, barely able to form the words. This is wrong. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, the space between us shrinking with each passing second. His gaze softened as he took in the emotion in my voice. I know, he said quietly. his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. But it doesn't feel wrong, does it? I wanted to pull away. I wanted to run, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning in, caught in the pull of something I couldn't explain. Our lips met, slowly at first, hesitant, but then with a growing urgency. It was everything I had been missing. Everything I had been craving. In that one moment, I felt truly alive. But as quickly as it had started, I pulled away. The reality of what I had just done crashing into me like a wave. I can't do this, I whispered. Stepping back, my breath was coming in quick gasps, and my heart was racing. I'm married. I have a family. I can't betray Daniel. Ethan's eyes didn't leave mine. But you already have, he said softly. His voice laced with something darker now. You've been betraying him long before tonight. His words hit me harder than I expected. It was the truth, and I knew it. I had been emotionally distant from Daniel for months, if not years. I had been searching for something in Ethan that I had lost in myself. I wasn't just betraying Daniel. I was betraying myself. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I can't keep doing this. I need to fix things with Daniel. I need to stop this before it gets worse. Ethan nodded, but his face remained unreadable. I understand, he said simply, though there was a trace of sadness in his voice. But don't expect it to go away. It won't. I left the room, my mind spinning with confusion, regret, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. The night felt heavier now, as though the weight of my choices was too much to bear. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. But the worst part was that I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The following days were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of Ethan from my mind. I avoided him at every family gathering, pretending like nothing had happened. But the truth was, everything had changed. I had changed. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was doing the right thing by focusing on my marriage, a part of me was still haunted by the taste of that kiss, the pull of something that felt so alive and so dangerous. And then, just when I thought things might calm down, Daniel came home. His presence was a welcome relief, but it also served as a reminder of everything I had been hiding. We barely spoke that night. Our interactions awkward and strained. The love we once shared felt like a distant memory. We had become strangers, living under the same roof, too afraid to confront the truth. I knew the time had come. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that my marriage was perfect, that I was happy. I had to tell Daniel the truth. I had to tell him what I had done, what I had been feeling, and what I had almost thrown away for a fleeting connection with someone else. But how do you tell the person you love that you've betrayed them? How do you admit to the person who has stood by you, supported you, and loved you unconditionally that you've broken their heart? And I wasn't sure how I could ever make things right. Part 3. The consequences of my actions. The following days were torture, retreating even further into himself. The atmosphere in our home was thick with unspoken words. Every glance between us felt loaded, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that had been left unsaid. I tried to reach out, to show him how sorry I was. But every attempt was met with silence. Daniel threw himself into his work, spending long hours at the office, coming home late, and when he was home, he avoided me. He would retreat into the study, disappearing behind his computer screen, or go straight to bed without a word. I couldn't blame him. How could I expect him to look at me the same way after what I had done? How could I expect him to forgive me so easily? I spent my nights alone, haunted by the sound of his absence. I had broken something between us, something fragile and precious, and I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. One evening, as I cleaned up after dinner, Daniel walked into the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, watching me silently. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt my throat tighten. I had no idea what he was thinking, but I could tell something was coming. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded, unable to speak, and we sat down at the dining table, facing each other. The air between us felt suffocating, the silence so heavy that it was hard to breathe. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, his voice steady. "And I need to know, why wasn't I enough for you, Clara?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. I had no excuse, no justification. I couldn't explain why I had done what I did, but I knew that I had failed him. I had failed us. It wasn't about you not being enough. My voice trembling. I felt lost, disconnected.